Welcome to Last Records. Today we're looking at rich people who ordered the finest food money could buy, only to realize the final bill would cost them their lives. From an expensive Arctic polar bear delicacy to a rare whiskey laced with methanol, every one of these meals ended in tragedy. It was February 8th, 2017, at a private dining society's winter gathering in a lodge high in the mountains outside Aspen, Colorado. Money learns to whisper to a certain kind of man that every door has a price, even the ones nature bolted shut for a reason. Roland Vestergaard was 56, a shipping heir who had turned a childhood fortune into a far larger one, and collected not objects, but experiences no one else could claim. His first choice was the club itself, an invitation-only supper society built entirely around the rarest and most forbidden foods on Earth. Joined in the certainty that money could open any door, he read a warning the way he read a price tag, as proof of exclusivity rather than a reason to stop. The centerpiece the night he died was polar bear liver, quietly obtained through illegal Arctic trophy channels and prepared off any menu. A retired physician among the members took him aside and told him plainly that Arctic crews had fallen gravely ill from this exact dish for over a century because the liver holds a dose of vitamin A a human body cannot survive. Roland heard the one man in the room who knew and asked for seconds. I've known a few men like Roland, the ones who hear a warning and register only that they are being told no. And I think the money makes it worse, because it teaches them that no is a word for other people. The scale is the part no diner can feel at the table, and it is the part that decides everything, because the danger is never a single bite, but the size of the helping. With the warning still hanging in the air, Roland took the fullest plate in the room, where a cautious man would have managed a sliver. The more I read about polar bear liver, the more I understood that this was never a myth. The Arctic explorers wrote about it more than a century ago, whole crews going half blind with splitting headaches and peeling skin after a single hearty meal of the stuff. By the time the plates were cleared, his choice was already made for good, settled somewhere inside him he could not reach. The first sign came a few hours later, back in his room. Roland buzzed a steward and said, almost calmly, that he had the worst headache of his life, and asked for the lights to be dimmed. The steward brought water and thought little of it. Within the hour, it was not calm. Roland was vomiting, unable to keep water down, gripping the sink with both hands. He said the lamp was blinding him, though it sat across the room turned low. His speech had begun to thicken, each word arriving a beat late, and a heavy drowsiness kept dragging his eyes shut in the middle of sentences. The steward, alarmed now, went and woke the retired physician who had warned him at dinner. The doctor took one look at the drifting eyes and the racing pulse and told them to call an ambulance without waiting another minute. By first light, Roland could not bear any light at all and no longer seemed sure where he was. The steward reached emergency services around dawn. With the weather that night grounding any medical helicopter, the nearest ambulance had to come the whole way by road, close to 40 minutes on icy switchback turns to reach the lodge. Roland was drifting in and out by the time it climbed into view, one hand still locked against his skull. In the back, he was barely responsive, the crew radioing ahead that a healthy man had gone from a headache to this in one night. The moment I keep coming back to is that quiet warning over dinner, offered and waved away, and how the one man in the room best equipped to save Roland's life was sitting right beside him hours before he ever needed saving. Roland died 2 days later in the Valley Hospital of acute vitamin A poisoning that swelled his brain past anything the doctors could reverse, a condition so rare the first team to see him lost time, not recognizing it. The supper club dissolved within the year. What lands hardest for me is how ordinary the fix would have been, one smaller choice at the table, and how completely a lifetime of hearing yes had trained him to make the larger one. I keep coming back to how avoidable it was, that everything needed to save Roland was already in the room with him. The warning, the expert, the simple option of less, and the only thing missing was any habit of believing a limit could apply to him. Roland paid a fortune to eat something the Arctic spent a million years making poisonous. This next woman paid nearly as much for a creature the law itself had tried to keep off her plate. It was September 19th, 2019, at a private dinner party in a rented villa in the hills above Florence, Italy. There is a hunger that has nothing to do with food, the hunger to be the one who dared, and it was that, not appetite, that May-Ann carried to the table. May-Ann Estero was 34, married into a fortune and hungry to matter on her own, which meant being the most fearless person at any table. Her whole account was eating what her followers would not, so when she heard of a protected sea turtle, an animal it was a serious crime to hunt or sell, she had to film herself eating it. She treated fear as a dare aimed personally at her, sure that flinching was the only real way a person could lose. Getting it took months and real money until the meat reached her villa through channels no one would name. A chef she had hired refused to cook it, warning her that turtle like this had poisoned whole villages, killing people who never knew which animal was safe. She filmed the refusal and served it herself anyway. I want to be fair to Mayanne, because chasing the feeling of being brave is a very human thing, but I think somewhere along the line, she had stopped asking whether a thing was safe and started asking only whether it would play well. The danger with sea turtle is not filth or spoilage, it is a toxin some animals carry and others do not, one that cooking cannot destroy and no diner can taste. Mayanne served herself from an animal loaded with it. Every account I found of this dish carried the same warning, that there is no test at the table and no telltale sign, and that for those chasing the legend, that very gamble is the appeal. She ate several rich portions for the camera, more than anyone else at the table, the harm already done somewhere inside that bravado. The first trouble came a few hours later, a burning tightness in her mouth and throat that she put down to strong, unfamiliar food. Mayanne treated it the way she treated every inconvenient thing, as a problem of willpower, just a reaction to something rich, she told the friends staying with her, something to sleep off. She stayed shut in her room through the whole next day, curtains drawn, nauseous and vomiting, texting that she had overdone it, posting nothing, too proud or too embarrassed to turn the aftermath into a story. A friend who looked in on her at midday found her pale and struggling to swallow and was waved straight back out. By evening, Mayanne could barely speak for the tightness in her throat. She stopped answering her phone. By the second night, she was drenched in sweat and confused, her skin taking on a yellow cast, and still she insisted between shallow breaths that she was fine, that she only needed to wait it out. The friend staying nearest finally stopped believing her, saw the state of her, and called for an ambulance over her protests. It reached the villa about 15 minutes later, well over a day after the first burning had started. The crew found her barely responsive, her pulse thin and racing, and moved fast. At the hospital, her blood work told the story within the hour, a body whose liver and kidneys were failing together. The part I find hardest to sit through is the waiting. A whole day of her telling herself it was nothing, and I think pride did far more damage in that room than the meal ever did on the plate. Mayanne died in the hospital of multiple organ failure, the toxin in that turtle having shut down her liver and kidneys faster than anything doctors could do to support them, with no antidote to reach for. Doctors believe the dose she took and the day she lost hiding it had cost her any chance. Her family quietly pulled her videos, and the chef who refused to cook the turtle gave one interview, then none again. It troubles me that the last thing she ever made was a video of a man telling her not to, and that she kept it in the edit precisely because his fear made her look braver. I keep coming back to how much of this was performance, that by the end she was not eating for herself at all, but for a crowd that would never know her name and would have scrolled past her by the next afternoon. Mayanne chased a thrill she could film. This next one chased perfection instead. The most exquisite dessert money could buy, never tasting the poison folded into its sweetness. It was March 2nd, 2018, at a rooftop party in a penthouse she had taken over for one night, high above Miami, Florida. Some dangers never hide in a dark alley at all. They arrive gift-wrapped and expensive, passed around a bright room full of people far too delighted to ask what is inside them. Camila Tuttle was 26, raised by a real estate family to believe the best night was the one everybody else wished they had been at. She was social, generous with a tab, and forever hunting the one thing no one else could put on their table. She lived for the moment a whole room went quiet in amazement, chasing the reaction a little more than the thing itself. For this party, she went looking on purpose for something impossible, and a private importer sold her a rare confection built from real bitter almonds, the kind restricted almost everywhere for the natural poison they carry. He gave her one clear rule, that a guest could enjoy a small taste and nothing more, because past a certain amount, the almonds turned truly lethal. Camila heard the rule and decided it was part of the mystique. I don't think Camila heard a safety limit that day. I think she heard a dare, and I know that feeling, the pull to make the rare, forbidden thing the centerpiece, while everyone is watching and the night is still young. It was never a trick, it was chemistry. Real bitter almonds hold a compound the body turns into cyanide, which starves the cells of oxygen, and the dose climbs with every extra piece, so a nibble is a curiosity and a plateful is a poisoning. What surprised me most is how old this danger is, that people have been poisoned for centuries by the very almonds prized for their flavor, and that past a small amount, it comes on fast and hits hard. She set them out like little jewels and ate them like candy, pressing one on each friend while she reached for her fourth. For a while, Camila was radiant, moving through her own party with a glass in one hand, tossing back another of the little sweets as she went. Most of her guests had stopped at the single taste she urged on them. She had long lost count of hers. Then it turned. She pressed the back of a hand to a flushed cheek, said she felt lightheaded, and her breathing began to come fast and shallow, far too fast for the 2 drinks she had nursed all night. A friend laughed for one more beat, certain it was the champagne, then watched her sway and drop, and the laughter died all at once. She slid to the floor. One friend crouched, thinking she had fainted, but this was not fainting, and nothing anyone in that room knew how to do was going to touch it. Someone reached emergency services inside about a minute, describing a young woman on the floor gasping for air she could not seem to use. Paramedics reached the penthouse in roughly 8 minutes and found Camila slipping in and out, her skin a strange cherry red, and moved fast, suspecting from the look of her exactly what they faced. They carried her out through a party gone silent, guests still holding the little almond sweets they had been lucky enough only to taste. My stomach turns at how cleanly the line fell that night, that the friends who obeyed the single rule walked away fine, and the host who could not stop was the one person it killed. Camila died before dawn of cyanide poisoning. Her cells starved of oxygen no matter how hard she fought to breathe, a course set the moment she stopped counting. The importer who sold her the confection was traced and charged, and the case became a quiet warning about the rare delicacies that pass through private hands, with a caution no one bothers to enforce. What I cannot let go of is how small the safe version of that night really was. 1 taste instead of a dozen, the same party, the same delight, and a completely different morning for everyone who came. I have a soft spot for the person who wants to be the fun one, who makes the whole room gasp, and that is exactly why this one aches for me, because the very instinct that made Camila such good company is what kept her reaching for one more. Camila was undone by the helpings she would not turn down. This next man had the opposite problem, a ritual followed so faithfully so long that he never thought to ask whether it had turned against him. It was November 11th, 2015, in a glass-walled estate above the water in Palm Beach, Florida. There is a particular fear that comes with great wealth and old age, of the one thing money cannot buy, and Harlan spent his final years trying to purchase his way around it anyway. Harlan Biscayne was 78, an industrialist who had built and sold companies for 50 years, and now aimed all that drive at outliving what his doctors expected. Central to the plan his costly longevity consultant drew up was a rare-aged cheese made from unpasteurized milk and flown in at extraordinary expense, eaten every single morning. He treated a routine like a contract with the universe, certain that if he held up his end, the protocol would hold up its end for him. The problem was never the cheese itself, it was that raw, unpasteurized milk can carry a bacterium especially dangerous to the old, and at 78, Harlan was exactly who it kills. His longtime doctor had warned him to run new habits past the medical team first. Harlan, who now trusted the new consultant more than the physician who had kept him alive for a decade, never did. There is something painfully human in Harlan to me, a brilliant man so frightened of dying that he stopped listening to the one person who truly understood how to keep him alive. He was not doing anything he could see as risky, eating a wholesome, celebrated food each morning exactly as his expensive protocol instructed. But raw milk cheese, aged the way this was, can harbor a bacterium that shrugs off the cold of a refrigerator, and in a man his age, it does not stay in the gut, it slips into the blood and reaches for the brain. It took me a few sources to really grasp how quietly this one works, that a person can eat something wholesome and expensive every day, doing everything they believe is right, while a hidden infection takes root and builds for weeks. Every morning the cheese sat on his plate, a little more of the infection took hold, and nothing about how he felt gave him a reason to stop. It did not come all at once. Over about a week, Harlan grew tired in a way his energy had never allowed, then feverish, then strangely unsteady, complaining of a headache that would not lift and a stiffness in his neck he could not explain. His household put it down to age and a hard season, and Harlan, who did not get sick, waved off every mention of a doctor. Then one morning, his housekeeper found him at the breakfast table, unable to follow her, his words wandering, his skin hot to the touch, the cheese sliced neatly and untouched in front of him. When he tried to stand, his legs would not hold him. She helped him down to the floor and called emergency services at once. Because the estate sat only minutes from a hospital, paramedics arrived in about 6 minutes, and by then Harlan was burning with fever and barely able to say his own name. They found a man in the grip of something that had been building for days, his blood pressure sliding, and worked fast to keep him with them on the way in. At the hospital, the tests came back quickly, an infection long past the gut and deep into his blood and the lining of his brain. The detail I keep turning over is how calm the setting was. A wealthy man at his own breakfast table on an unremarkable morning doing the exact thing he believed was saving his life. Harlan died 2 days later of an overwhelming infection, a listeria that had crossed from a beloved daily cheese into his bloodstream and the lining of his brain, an illness that hunts the very old almost exclusively. Those who reviewed it found nothing careless in how he ate, only a wholesome-looking habit his new team never checked against the risks of his age. His longtime doctor, the one he stopped consulting, has spoken since of how preventable it all was. I think the cruelest part is that Harlan wasn't being reckless at all. He was being disciplined, and his discipline just happened to point him at the wrong expert at the worst possible time. The thing I want people to take from Harlan is small and unglamorous, that a new health habit is still a change worth mentioning to your doctor, because the man in this story could afford every advantage on earth and still died from a breakfast. Harlan trusted the wrong expert and paid slowly, over weeks. This next man did the opposite, overruled every expert in the room, and paid inside a single evening. It was January 26th, 2014, in a rented apartment high above the streets of Tokyo, Japan. Some men mistake fear for respect, and Alden had been feared so long he could no longer tell the difference, even when that fear was trying to save his life. Alden Davenport was 53, an American money manager whose fortune was matched only by his need to get his way. He collected extreme meals the way other men collect cars, and had come to Japan for the pufferfish liver chefs are forbidden by law to serve. He wanted the illegal cut, the one that came with a story. He read a law as a challenge to his importance. Certain anything truly off limits was just a thing the right pressure could unlock. A licensed chef at a top restaurant had already refused him flatly, since preparing that cut was a crime that could end his career. So Alden took his money elsewhere, and a fixer set up an off-the-books meal in a rented apartment, the fish handled by someone with no license to prepare fugu and every reason to take the cash. I have rarely felt as much for a bystander as I do for that first chef, a craftsman who said no exactly as his training demanded, only to watch a man with enough money carry that refusal somewhere it would not be honored. The poison is one of the most efficient in nature. It does not burn or bleed. It switches off the nerves that move the muscles from the lips inward, and there is no antidote, only a machine to breathe for you and time, which is why the honest chef said no. One fact that absolutely terrified me about this poison is that the person it's killing usually stays fully aware the entire time, thinking clearly inside of a body that has quietly stopped obeying them. The first slices went down with a faint tingle across the lips, the very first sign every warning about this fish had promised would come. For a little while, Alden was triumphant, describing the tingle to the table like a man reviewing a rare wine, telling them this was the real thing at last. Then it stopped being a novelty. The numbness climbed from his lips to his cheeks to his hands, and the delight drained out of his face as it became clear the feeling was not slowing down. He reached for his water and knocked the glass over instead, his fingers no longer doing what he asked. He tried to stand, and his legs simply would not answer. A guest laughed, thinking he had had too much sake, and then stopped laughing. Within minutes, Alden was slumped low in his chair, still awake, still tracking every face with his eyes, but unable to speak or lift his arms from the table. His breathing shallow and deliberate, each pull of air a visible effort. The man who had prepared the fish had gone white against the far wall and would not come near him. Someone finally understood this was not drink and called for help. Paramedics reached the apartment in about 8 minutes, and by then Alden was fighting for every breath, his chest barely rising. They forced air into him with a bag and mask, and carried him down the narrow stairs to the street. The whole way there, he was fully conscious inside a body that had simply stopped listening to him, his eyes moving from face to face while nothing else could. What horrifies me most is the awareness of it, that this is not a poison that lets a person drift off. It leaves them fully present while it takes everything else. And I cannot imagine a lonelier way to spend those final minutes. Alden reached the hospital alive and was put on a ventilator at once, the one thing that has ever pulled anyone back. But the liver had carried a lethal dose of tetrodotoxin, and despite everything the machines did, the paralysis spread until his body gave out. He died of tetrodotoxin poisoning before dawn, exactly the antidote-proof death the chef had described. Authorities opened a criminal investigation, and the fixer and the man who prepared it were arrested. I think what makes this one land so different for me is that Alden was warned more completely than almost anyone in these stories. Every fact laid out plainly in front of him, and he heard all of it as a price rather than a truth. I went in thinking this was a story about a dangerous fish, and I came out thinking that it was about power, about what happens when a man has been told yes so often that he can no longer hear a no meant to save his life. Alden bought his way past a warning that could not be bought off. This last pushed past no warning at all. The danger in her glass hidden inside the very thing she trusted most, its price. It was October 23rd, 2021, in a private tasting room beneath a collector's townhouse in Edinburgh, Scotland. We like to believe the more a thing costs, the safer it must be. And that quiet assumption, more than anything in the bottle, is what ended up causing everything to come crashing down. Maisie Mackenzie was 45. One of the more serious rare spirits collectors in her circle, and her deep expertise was the very thing that betrayed her, making her sure she could never be fooled. She had paid a sum she disclosed to no one for a bottle billed as a lost pre-war treasure, and planned a small evening to open it. She trusted the provenance more than the pour, certain that a price that high was its own kind of guarantee. What she had really bought was a sophisticated fake, a prestige bottle refilled with poorly distilled spirit contaminated with methanol. A fellow collector had warned her that fakes this good were everywhere now, and to have it tested first. Maisie, proud of her eye, decided it was far too special to waste on a lab. I understand the temptation here better than I would like. The way real expertise can curdle into a belief that you personally are unfoolable, and I think that belief is the single most expensive thing a collector can own. The danger was never the fine old whiskey she believed she was drinking. It was the methanol in that poorly distilled spirit, which the body turns into formic acid that attacks the eyes and organs. A sip would have been bad. Maisie, savoring the pour of a lifetime, shared generous glasses with two guests. Everything I turned up about counterfeit spirits pointed to the same grim detail, that the poison hides easily inside something already expected to taste complex and strange, and by the time the body sounds any alarms, hours are gone. The first glass went down warm and rich, exactly as expensive as she had hoped. No reason to stop at one. For the rest of that evening, Maisie felt only the warm blur of a very good night, and her guests went home believing they had shared something rare. It was the next morning that everything turned. She woke with a crushing headache and called down that she could not seem to shake it. Then came something that frightened the household far more than pain. A strange, flat complaint that the room had gone dim, that she could not see it properly, that the light was wrong. She rubbed at her eyes and it did not clear. She reached for a glass on the nightstand and missed it entirely. A guest tried to walk her to a chair, and she could not find her feet, one hand groping the air where the wall should have been. Her breathing turned heavy and labored, and a creeping confusion made her hard to follow, her sentences trailing off in the middle. One of the guests who had shared the bottle telephoned that morning, slurring, saying his own sight had gone strange, and that call made someone in the house realize this was not a hangover. That guest, still clear enough to be frightened, was the one who told them to call an ambulance. Paramedics reached the townhouse in about 10 minutes and recognized the pattern at once, moving with a speed that told the family how serious it was. By then, she could no longer tell them her own name, the poison having worked through her all night while she slept. The quiet horror for me is the delay built right into it. That she went to bed happy, sure the evening had been a triumph, while the thing that would kill her was already hours deep into its work. Maisie died in the hospital 2 days later of methanol poisoning, her body having turned it into formic acid that stole her sight and shut her organs down. The guest who called for help survived, treated in time because the crew knew what they were seeing. She had simply taken in too much, too many hours before anyone understood why. Her collection was quietly sold, and the bottle became a cautionary tale among collectors of things too rare to ever be sure of. What I find so sad about Maisie is that her knowledge was completely real. She truly was an expert, and it was that very expertise, the pride of the trained eye, that talked her out of the one simple test that would have saved her. If there is one thread through all six, I think it is this: that money can buy the rarest things on earth, but not the one humble sentence that would have saved everyone here. The admission that maybe, just this once, the warning was meant for you too.